Now, President Bola Tinubu's second anniversary in office has come at a point when Nigeria stands at a pivotal moment, reflecting on a period characterized by challenges and a determined resolve to reshape the nation's economic trajectory. President Bola Tinubu himself starkly described the situation as a sinking ship earlier, burdened by unstable fuel subsidies and corrupt multiple foreign exchange regime that had become could hold on our nation's neck, strangling our nation's future. That's according to President Tinubu. But these tough decisions, the administration argues, were not optional, but absolutely necessary for Nigeria's future and ease and sustainable growth. Now, the Renewed Hope agenda was a clear declaration of intent to dismantle economic instability, enhance security, curb corruption, reform governance, and lift millions out of poverty. 2 years on, the administration confidently asserts that these economic reforms are not just theoretical constructs, but are actively yielding results, propelling Nigeria towards a stronger economy and positioning it for robust growth and resilience against global shocks. Well, let's talk to someone that will understand this better than I do. Mr. Kenneth Erikume is a partner, tax reporting and strategy, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks, Tolu. I'm not so sure I understand it better than you do.
I guess you do. But let's get to understand from where we started from, because I like us to take a few steps back so that we know where we are headed. When we go back to when we're paying so much for subsidy monthly, when we the disparity between the foreign exchange market, the other market, and of course at the central bank, the Apex Bank, the disparity was so large at that time. But now we seem to make some sense of this better than what it used to be. What is your understanding of this and where we are at the moment 2 years after?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think you rightly alluded to the fact that for you to get perspective of where we are, you've got to go back and look at what was the case previously.
Yeah.
In relation to, I mean, at this time, 2 years ago and further back, we had a situation where investors were quite skeptical about bringing in their funds into Nigeria through the official market. And that was essentially because the amount of nairas they would get for an equity investment into Nigeria would translate to less naira, and they would not be guaranteed of the ability to, when they earn returns, convert it at that rate, because we had an illiquid market. So this created a lot of issues around attracting foreign direct investment. And we saw that stalled for a bit, with so much uncertainty around how things will pan out. One thing foreign investors don't like is uncertainty, right? So if the pricing is right, or the price is known, then they have more confidence in coming into the country. So we had that sort of situation. On the fuel subsidy side, we had barrels or liters of petroleum products that nobody could account for. So we had significant consumption that everyone was now wondering, can the market really support this sort of consumption? It was clear that there was significant leakage in that structure, and the subsidy was not getting into the hands of Nigerian citizens. So I'm one of those people who is very clear that the reforms undertaken by the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's regime in addressing these two things was perhaps the most strategic thing you could do for the country at the time. Now, the challenge we've had was that it came with significant economic shocks. Yep. Because, inflation in itself is not a bad thing. And you would, when you engage economists on this subject matter, they'll tell you that a certain level of inflation is necessary because the economy is growing. And the expectation is that purchasing power will improve and people would have the ability to spend more. And when people are spending more and it's competing for same goods and services, the price would increase. Yeah, so that's the expectation. As the cost of living improves or the purchasing power improves, there should be some form of inflation. But the stability of that growth is what is so important. So we were hit with the shocks. But I think, it was largely necessary, because what we're seeing now is the settling of, those shocks. And you can see that, in a long time, I think since 2022 or even, further back, we've now seen inflation coming to a level that Nigerians are able to relate with, between the 23–24% range. And that is, impressive, considering where we're coming from. In the same note, we've seen that, the amount of consumption of petroleum products has reduced.
It has reduced, indeed.
And what that means is that, the corruption that was in that ecosystem is now being plugged significantly, right? Which means that the interventions that government has to make, which was being eaten by that corruption in subsidy, will now translate into the hands of citizens. But that's the big point now. And why do I say this? Government, with the exchange rate, is able to realize better revenues from crude, as well as, revenues generally. And what you see is that in terms of the FAC distribution that goes to the state, in April 2022, maybe 700 billion. April 2024, let's say 1.2 trillion. It has increased significantly. And April 2025, we're seeing something in 1.8 trillion. Going into the hands of the subnationals. And I think that that's, impressive. I mean, one could argue that the exchange rate has also gone up, inflation has gone up, but in real terms, it allows the state governments to intervene in, in the grassroots with better infrastructure, better pay, and meeting up with their obligations. I think that bit, maybe we are not essentially ready for it as a nation, because the states now have this ability to do more with the funds which they are receiving.
Of course.
But the efficiency with which they are using those funds is something that I think needs a dialogue, where every party comes together and says, we need to improve the efficiency and ensure that we're building on critical infrastructure that will yield fruits for citizens in the future.
Inclusive.
One of the things we do, and myself inclusive, is that we're quick to look at the center and say the federal government. But, the states and the local government, because the local government now have won that court case, they now control their funds and should control their funds. But we now need to have proper demands that they're delivering efficient, quality goods and services for citizens. But overall, it's quite positive for me in terms of the outcome of the reforms.
I totally agree with you that there needs to be a dialogue around the state governments and, local governments. Because I checked back, and just like you said, about 62% increase in revenue for some states at the moment. So, policies and initiatives that would bring up inclusive growth is what we should be seeing moving forward. Why, if you want to react to that, I don't mind. But now let's go a bit to the tax bill and the back and forth we had initially. You know what that was, back and forth, the VAT thing, sharing formula and all of that. But I think finally now we've been able to harmonize this document. What are your expectations? What do you make of where we have gotten to with regards to that document?
First of all, I would want to look at the process, or look back in couple of years up till now.
Yeah.
And what we've seen is a careful thought around framing the tax ecosystem or the tax regime from a Nigerian context. And when you look at some of the reforms that have already happened, because this tax bill is a massive transformation that's going to overhaul the completely the tax system. But some of the strides that the government has taken have been carefully thought through. One of it is the withholding tax regulations, which kicked in, earlier this year, which has brought, clarity and certainty to different transactions, that people are now clear on what rates they should deduct. They are also clear on exemptions and what should be exempted. And I think that that was a very good move, you know, by the presidency and the government in general. And we've seen also the VAT modification order 2024. Again, careful thought has gone into that document. Apart from exempting basic food items and all the, you know, things that, you know, the most vulnerable would impact the most vulnerable. I see a clear thought around looking at energy sustainability in that document, ensuring that gas, which is, you know, the next frontier from a Nigerian perspective, is properly incentivized, and looking at, you know, looking at renewables as well. And even, you know, looking at the fact that, you know, with the fuel subsidy removal, energy became quite expensive, so removing VAT on that. Now, that was a journey. We're now, you know, in the space where the full tax transformation is going to happen. And we can see that the process has largely been inclusive with the public hearings. The debates, you know, the House of Reps have come up with a version, the Senate came up with a version, and very quickly they've been able to align and come up with a consolidated, you know, with the conference committee, come up with a consolidated document. So my expectation is that in a few weeks, this document would actually be signed. And it will, you know, usher in a new phase from a Nigerian perspective around the tax regime. And this is a massive milestone in my view. Right? Because, you know, for many years, no one has, you know, considered or executed an overhaul of the Nigerian tax system. So, you know, for us, I think we need to take a breath, first of all, and appreciate that, you know, we've been able to do this. But, you know, certain things in that document, you know, are quite, you know, raises my optimism. One of it, for example, is the transformation of the Joint Tax Board to the Joint Revenue Board. You know, what we are seeing now is sort of disjointed tax administration. And, you know, the debate, you know, amongst the business community has always been the multiplicity of tax, the multiple tax organizations they have to deal with, and all of that complexity. And I think the Joint Revenue Board, the way it has been envisaged in that document, is going to play a critical role in ensuring that, the harmonization of tax regimes comes to fruition. And they have more power as against what they currently have to make that happen. Over and above that, the tax to GDP ratio has always been a debate.
Really a debate.
10% is not good from a Nigerian perspective.
I've known that for as far back as, no, I think we were about 8 before.
We were 8% before. Then we did some rearrangement of the data. We got 10%. Now we're doing 13. So luckily, I think we've made some progress. But the ambition,
compared to other African countries around us,
the ambition should be at least 18%. And that's, I think, the Ministry of Finance has been clear that is in the next couple of years, that is the direction. Now, what has created that? What has created that is the disjointed tax regimes. And it's a problem of constitution, that you have the federal, you have the states, and you have the local government administering different taxes and having different powers and mandates over identity of individuals, property, and assets. So you cannot have a consolidated database that tells you, what Kenneth Erikume sitting here owns, what I spend on, and what my income is. That, with that lack of data, government is unable to respond and ensure that everybody is paying their fair share of tax. So you have a lot of evasion in the system. So the Joint Revenue Board, again, would have a mandate to ensure that there is proper identification, proper profiling, and proper assessment across the 3 tiers of government. And then you have this, nice concept of the tax ombudsman or the tax ombuds, which brings, because in the ecosystem, people would want to comply, but they don't know how to comply. Some people, when they are harassed, then they pay to non-state actors. Now, the tax ombuds will play in that space and ensure that these people who are vulnerable are properly protected and their rights are enforced. So I think that, those things for me creates significant optimism, as well as the fact that, we should also appreciate that a good tax system is progressive.
Yeah, it is.
So the most vulnerable should be protected, and the most affluent should, contribute and ensure that, wealth is distributed. And I think all of these, foundational and fundamental principles were carefully considered in the tax reform. Now, is it perfect? Of course, in life, nothing is perfect. My wife still married me, but I'm not perfect. So there's nothing that is perfect. And I think it is a very good start. And we would have the finance bill process to ensure that we continue to fine-tune things. Athletes always have to train themselves. Even though they are the best, they still need a coach to continue to improve. And I think that that's where we are at this point.
Always interesting having these chats with you. Now, we've gone through the policies on the other side, talking about some monetary things and some fiscal things. And now we've talked about basically the tax law and all of that. Now, moving forward, another 2 years, at least for the first 4-year tenure, what are your expectations? Now, let's start with impact on the masses now, because like we said, the macro are being addressed, the micro are being addressed, and the macro is also on one side. That needs to be, that's people, businesses, and all of that. What is your outlook considering all of this moving forward? Trickling down, that's my question really.
I think trickling down is the trickiest part. Honestly, and the biggest complexity for government. Addressing macro is simple, but ensuring that when you implement your programs gets to the grassroots is really the big challenge. If I were to consider it from my lens, I would think that there are two critical things for government to consider at the moment. One of it is, investment in critical areas, particularly education. When you look at data, there is a direct correlation, or inverse correlation actually, between the penetration of education and fertility rate, right? So the more educated people are, the less, the less fertility, as you can see in developed countries. So it's not always a good thing, but it has its merits, because you cannot grow your GDP slower than population, right? True. Because what that would mean is that people become poorer. So I think a critical, apart from the fact that, when you have a thriving population, you need to get them very productive. And education is the only instrument through which you can activate that. And there are several case studies of this. When you look at, the progress that China made over the past 40 years, and the innovation that they have been able to bring, such that they are competing economic power. Again, education was at the helm of that transformation. Same with India, with the, how they are playing in the global ecosystem and the global value chain. Again, education is key. So for me, I think that government needs to make that massive investment in education, innovation at different tiers, and not just the universities, even the vocational, trainings and all that. The other bit which would be of particular interest for citizens is government efficiency. Elon Musk and Donald Trump has made this quite a topical issue, but it is even more important for us from a Nigerian perspective. And it's not just about cost cutting, because government has a role, because people say, oh, government has to go to cost budget and all that. Government has a role to play by spending to ensure that the economy continues to thrive. People talk about cutting the cost of manpower. When you fire people, people become unemployed, and that doesn't help the economy. So it is more around productivity from government, to say that these ministries, these departments, these agencies, they are actually stimulating or allowing the private sector to thrive. And that is one of the ingredients that I think you can easily and quickly make an impact at the grassroots. At the moment, the perspective of most people and the impression many times when they think about government, would always, come up with some negativity. So think about, when you encounter, and I don't want to call, different ministries, but the quality of what you're getting, from, as a citizen or as a business needs to improve. And if there is a way for us to track and monitor the performance of different government ministries, departments, and agencies, I think it is high time we do that to ensure that they're meeting up with the mandates that they've been charged with and the expectations of Nigerian citizens. And this is everything from, the public schools to the public hospitals to, the transport systems, the police, and so on and so forth. So for me, I think that would be an important area of focus, which could ensure that citizens begin to feel the impact of government and, understand and appreciate that this investment, because I don't call it a sacrifice, I believe it's an investment we have made over the past couple of years, begins to yield the required dividends that we've been expecting.
Mr. Kenneth Erikume, Partner Tax Reporting and Strategy, PwC, thank you so much. It's always interesting having this chat with you. Thanks for coming through.
Thanks very much.
I appreciate this.
I appreciate you.
All right, then. Well, let's